In this one, the aim is to jack up the front of my 2015 Sportster 72, and to do that I'm going to be installing the 9.5 inch tracker die fork dampers. So it's going to jack the front of my bike up hopefully by 4 inches. That's what Tracker Die's website says. So anyway, let's get to it. Now with these fork caps you want to apply a bit of pressure and push down because there's quite a bit of spring in there. Once the forks have been removed, turn them over to take out the springs and stock dampers. Also, the tracker die dampers come with these PVC spacers, which you can choose to install depending on how long you want to lengthen your forks. If you want the maximum length out of the dampers, just remove the PVC spacers. So what you want to do is retain the stock springs and these little clips. Be sure not to break them because they're pretty flimsy. So to install the new dampers, you need to collapse the fork tubes into the fork lowers. Then you can slide in your new dampers. Now to secure the damper rods into the bottom of the forks, you need to reinstall the springs and top cap temporarily, so you can push down on the forks to hold the damper rod in place while you install the oil drain bolt and new copper crush washers which came with the kit. Once the damper rods are securely in place with the bolts, you can remove the fork caps and fill the forks with 12 ounces of fork oil. Then reinstall your stock spacer and fork cap. One thing I didn't account for was the length of the brake line. So I've just tied off the caliper here, but that bottom caliper mount just there is meant to go down here. So it's about 3 inches too short. So I do need to lengthen this brake line for these extended forks to work. Alrighty, so because I couldn't buy a brake line kit for the Sportster 72 online, I had to buy these parts individually. So what I bought here is some stainless steel braided brake line from TC Bros, and it's 5 foot of brake line. I bought a brake block off an Australian website. I got these AN3 fittings to go onto the brake block, and I got these two 3/8 inch banjos along with some copper crush washers, and I will add a link in the description as to where I bought all these parts from. We're just going to cut the sheathing off the stainless steel braided brake line before we attach the fittings. Now what he's doing is flaring the braid away from the hose inside the line. Now to install the copper olive. So the reason why I couldn't reuse this brake block is because it has the fittings where the hose gets crimped on. I couldn't find any of the crimps to put them back onto this, and I don't actually know if this brake block is reusable, so that's why I got the brake block with the AN fittings, as it's much easier to DIY it. So the thing is with these ABS bikes, what you need to do is essentially not let the system bleed back to the ABS valve, because then you're going to need to take it to a dealership and get your brake lines re-bled. I will be doing that in the future anyway, but I'm trying to get away with not bleeding the brake fluid past the valve, so I can get away with riding it to a dealership for them to do it. So now just fitting the new brake block. So with that new brake block, the way that the arms come out are completely different to the way the stock one does. These arms swing back to the back of the bike, where the other one sort of swung down. So now we're just going to put the AN fitting on to see if we're going to have enough room from that brake block to see if it's going to hit the frame. And if it does, we might have to try and bend those arms out a little bit. So as you can see here, with the AN fitting on that brake block, we're not going to be able to fit the brake line, as it's going to run into the frame when you're on full steering lock. So what we're going to have to do is probably apply some heat to these little arms and slowly bend them down and out. So with the stock forks, the gap between the bottom of the triples and the fork lowers was 5 inches, and now the gap is 8 inches. So those trackerdie fork dampers have extended the forks by 3 inches. I gotta say, I'm really happy with the extended length of 3 inches, and I wouldn't want to go much longer than that, just because I'd need to lengthen my ABS line, as it's pretty well at its limits at the moment, but it isn't too tight and it will work. And also, if I extended the forks longer than 3 inches, I'd also need to change out my stock stand, as the bike is now on a fair bit of a lean. It's not too much of a lean, it's pretty acceptable, but I wouldn't want to lean the bike over any further. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is just bleed the brakes. I'm not going to film myself doing that, it would just make this video way too long. So now I'm just going to throw up some shots of the bike with the extended forks compared to stock.